The REST operator might look useful enough, but it might be a little bit hard to think of some real-life use cases based on what we've seen so far. So when would we want to actually use the REST operator? Especially since it doesn't seem that challenging just to put our list of arguments into an array whenever we want to call a function. So let's think through a practical example here. I want you to pretend for a second that you are authoring an open source JavaScript library for fancy math calculations, okay? So let's create an object that will serve as our library for that, is basically for our library. So I'll make a new object and we'll call it math library, like so. Now, what's a reasonable method to have inside of a math library? Maybe you want a method that will multiply two numbers together. So let's call it calculate product, and it will take numbers a and b, and then we can return a times b. And so yeah, sure, we could do a times b easily enough, but we're going to say that we're going to have it as a method as a part of our math library. So let's say that you pause right here. You wrote this function into your library. You're going to package it up and deploy it online for other engineers to use. So maybe a few months go by and your library starts to get really popular with hundreds of other developers making use of it. But in collecting feedback for your library, maybe you notice that developers have one very common complaint about it. Maybe everyone says that the method named calculate product right here is a ridiculous name, and the method should really be named just multiply instead, because that's what we're doing. We're just multiplying this method right here, or excuse me, multiplying the arguments together. So here comes the hard part now. You've got calculate product, and you're now in a position where you want everyone to change the name to multiply. Okay, so you want to change the name. So if you just make that change and deploy it, you could break a ton of apps out there that are already depending upon your library, and they want to call, they've got a ton of code already that are calling calculate product, but you're saying to them, I want to rename this to multiply instead. We want to rename this. So how might we deal with that? Obviously, we can't just deploy a version that changes this name over to multiply, because that'll break a ton of code. It'll make people really unhappy with your library. So we need some strategy to kind of mitigate this here. So let's investigate one approach for solving this. First, I'm going to declare another method. We're going to call this one multiply, and it's going to do the same exact thing. Okay, so let's return a times b. And here's our multiply method, because this is what our all of our engineers want. That's what they want to see. So this now works. We can call multiply in here, and sure enough, it's probably going to multiply two numbers. But we have some duplicate logic in here. Okay, we have duplicate logic. Both multiply and calculate product are doing the exact same thing. So how might we solve this issue? Well, instead of carrying around duplicate methods, maybe whenever someone calls calculate product, we should just pass the call on to multiply. Let's see what that might look like. Instead of calculating the product right there, I could return this dot multiply. And then instead of always assuming okay, they're always being passing in A and B here, maybe we just say, give me everything. And then when we actually call multiply, we spread those those arguments out to multiply like so. And then we could also put in a console log here. Please use the multiply method instead. Okay, so what would be the benefit of this approach right here? Well, the benefit of this approach would be we do not have duplicate logic sitting all around our code base. In addition, we've also now got some code in here where we don't really care the number of arguments that are being passed to this function anymore. Maybe we've got many such functions that we want to deprecate over time, and no matter what signature they had before, we're just going to take all those arguments we had before and pass them on to the new signature. And so later on, when another engineer comes along and says, oh, we've got a deprecated method here, maybe we need to, we should probably delete this because we're not making use of it anymore. Then they can just go in very easily and just delete the entire method. And so I would argue that a great use case of the spread and the rest and the spread operators are for just handling pass-through of arguments to different functions. When you don't care about necessarily worrying about the specific number of arguments, you just want to call some line of code. So let's continue in the next section with some exercises around the rest and the spread operators.